Has your family ever teased you about learning Spanish? Have you ever felt left out or been told that you're not Latino enough? Have you spent hours and hours studying only to not remember or be told that you sound white or gringo? Well, I have been exactly in your shoes. Hi there and welcome. My name's Sloan, and I grew up as a no Sabo kid, and I've spent the last 3 years learning languages and figuring out how I study and learn the best. So, to really get the full scope of my language journey, we have to go back a bit farther than 3 years. You see, I actually started learning different languages when I was about 13, when I started to learn Japanese. You see, I was really into anime at the time, as many teenagers are, and I picked up a Learn Japanese book. And, well, the rest is history. Now, I will say, I did not stick with Japanese very long. It only lasted about a month or two before I decided that mm, this probably wasn't for me. But a few years later, when I got to high school, I started to learn German. And I was actually really invested in the language. I spent the entire 3 years that I was in high school learning German and getting acquainted with the language. And I got up to probably about a B2 level on the CEFR scale. But unfortunately, as most people do coming out of high school, I stopped using it. There wasn't really any German speakers around me to actually use the language, so I stopped using it. And in the last 10 years, I've probably only maybe used a couple words here and there. Now, that isn't to say that I don't want to get back to it. And in fact, I plan to in the new year. But for right now, I'd probably have to say I'm back practically to A1. Now, my journey with Spanish is a little different from German or any of the other languages that I've tried. Spanish is my dad's side of the family's native language. And I didn't grow up in the house speaking Spanish, primarily because since I was in a mixed household, we grew up speaking English, especially, living in the US. And so I never really cared to learn Spanish in school because I was a contrarian and I didn't really want to learn the language because I was being made fun of for not knowing it. And that really started to change around the time that I was figuring out what I wanted to major in college. I was a few years out of high school, and college wasn't exactly a straightforward track for me. In fact, I've still not finished college. I dropped out of my first major, which I did love, but it wasn't the correct path for me. And so I went back to a community college and decided that I was just going to mess around with a few classes and see what stuck. And one of the classes that I took was Spanish because I was interested in probably a dozen different languages at that point, but that's what was offered. And so this probably would have been 9 years ago now. So about 6 years prior to when I picked Spanish back up. And I only spent that one semester learning Spanish, but it it stuck with me like German didn't. It was always in the back of my mind. And so fast forward to the beginning of 2022. I decided that for my New Year's resolution, I was actually going to sit down and finally learn Spanish. I started using Duolingo. Over 1,000 days later, I'm still going at it. I actually had a reason to stick with Spanish this time. I decided that I was going to learn Spanish to surprise my dad for his 50th birthday. Unfortunately, about 2.5 months after I decided that I was going to start this project, or my dad passed. And it was really hard. It still is hard. But I used Spanish as a coping mechanism for the grief. And it still makes me feel close to him. In maintaining that habit of keeping up learning Spanish every day, I eventually branched out into other languages again. For the first year of regularly learning languages. I did stick with Spanish pretty exclusively. I think I dabbled a little bit here and there, but it was mostly just Spanish straight ahead. Fast forward to about a year and a half ago, June of 2023, I decided, you know what? I really want to learn a language with a different script. And so I picked up Arabic. Well, I tried. It stuck around for only a couple months, but it pushed me outside of my comfort zone in a way that Spanish or even German didn't. With German, I was in an academic setting, which was at the time very, very comfortable to me. In fact, I was regularly scoring the top marks in my class for German. And Spanish, since I grew up listening to it and being surrounded by it, it was still comfortable enough to me that it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. Whereas Arabic was completely different. I studied that more than I've probably ever studied anything. By pushing myself to do that, I learned not only bits and pieces of the language, mostly the alphabet, if I'm being honest, um, but I also learned how I learn best. It's not through flashcards or through classroom or any really traditional teaching method that's used in language learning. I learn best through audio cues. And if you follow a lot of language YouTubers, you'll find that a lot of them say that that is the most natural way to learn languages is just input, 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 whether that be through watching shows or listening to podcasts or reading books. People say that you can learn a language in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever they try to preach at you, which you can definitely learn basic phrases. But to actually learn the language and be able to use it in day to day life outside of just saying, hi, how are you? How much does this cost? To actually get into the nitty gritty of the language, it takes so much more time than an hour a day for 30 days. In fact, my most effective way that I've been able to learn as much as I have is the slow and steady method. I spend no more than an hour per language per day learning. Now, part of that is because I suspect I have ADHD, and being able to concentrate for that long is difficult for me whenever I'm not completely focused in. But an hour a day is possible. And it doesn't even have to be a full hour all at once. In fact, most of the time, what I do is I break it up into 15 or 30-minute chunks and spread it throughout the day. So I'll listen to a podcast while I'm cooking. One of my favorites right now is Noetos. I'll spend 15 minutes on Duolingo or in my Anki deck or watching a video on Dreaming Spanish. The important thing isn't to cram as much as you can all at once. The important thing is to spend time and truly try to understand what's going on. Now, there is one more language that I'd like to talk about today, and I'd like to give a little bit of backstory before. Back in 2023, there was a little project that was started by the YouTuber and streamer Quackity. And for those who don't know, Quackity is a bilingual content creator from Mexico who a lot of his content is in Minecraft. And he started this project called the QSMP. An SMP is a survival multiplayer server. So basically, a bunch of different Minecraft creators from all over the world were brought in and were just playing Minecraft together. And it started out as Spanish and English, but eventually they also brought in Brazilian Portuguese, French, and then later on Korean, Spanish. And they had plans for more, unfortunately. I'm not going to get into the drama, but the server ended. In watching and participating in the community around the QSMP, that really ignited the spark within me to sit down and actually learn Portuguese, because I have a friend who is Brazilian and I had been interested in the language already, but being in a greater community of people from so many different backgrounds, it pushed me further and it made me actually take the leap and start the language. And within about 2 months, I had gotten almost to the same level as my Spanish. In fact, I was, according to online tests, which take those as you will, I had already gotten in 2 months to about a B1 level, which, considering I had already spent over a year learning Spanish, it made sense. Once you figure out the cognates and figure out the differences between the two languages, the beginning stages of learning one to the other are very, very easy. But you do have to work on figuring those out first. I actually owe a lot of that early progress not to the actual studying. I actually owe a lot of that to Twitch streamers, especially Selbit and Baji and Tasercraft. And although currently I do have Portuguese on a bit of the back burner, I've got it in maintenance mode right now. I do still love the language and I cannot wait to get back to it. I just have some other projects and some different focuses right now. So, what do I take away from all this? From 3+ years of learning languages and experimenting with all of the different apps and different ways to learn, there's no one size fits all solution. What works for you is not going to work for me, and vice versa. But some pretty universal takeaways is slow is sustainable. People get burnt out if they try to cram everything in all at once. And if you plan to use this language for the long term, if you plan on living somewhere, or if you have a partner or family members who speak a different language, don't try to rush it. In fact, rushing it can kill your joy. Another thing that I've learned is that streaks can be both a boon and a bane. They can both help or hinder your progress. While maintaining a daily streak can be great motivation, if you happen to fall off of that streak, or if something happens that interrupts your progress, that can be way more demotivating than just making it a habit in the first place. Because while number go up gives the good chemicals, number go to zero makes the bad chemicals. Yeah, utilize a streak if you need to get that habit built, but don't rely on the streak to be the only motivation for that habit. And finally, for me, it is best to study in smaller sections throughout the day rather than one big block. Because for me, I tend to get fatigued whenever I do big study sessions that last multiple hours. But if I am doing 20 minutes here, 30 minutes here, it's much more sustainable for my focus and attention. It's also a lot more flexible. Now, thanks for sticking around to hear about my journey. And now I'd like to hear about yours. Go ahead and drop a comment about what languages you're learning or want to learn. And if you'd like to see more, you can go ahead and check out this video where I try out the refold method for the first time.